Good afternoon. We're here to convene the meeting of the Board of Adjustment for August 1st, 2013. We're in City Council chambers. It's 1:30. We're here to hear special exemptions, variances, oil and gas related cases, and appeals from the decision of a director. I'd ask at this time that members of the audience would please silence their cell phones. Help us to have a more efficient meeting. Our first agenda item is to receive the minutes of the July 11th meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? Great. Our next agenda item, we have continuances, requests, withdrawals. The first item under that is the request by staff.
We have one today, item number 11, case number 13598 is requesting a continuance to September 19th.
Any requests by the public?
Move approval.
All in favor? Our next agenda item is our consent docket, which consists of two cases. And we'll entertain a motion in a second to approve that at this time.
I'll move the consent docket.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, those items are approved. Kathy, we call the first case?
Item number 3, case number 13756, request of Putnam City Schools for a variance to permit a freestanding accessory sign exceeding the maximum height and size and to allow level 3 electronic message display located at 8500 Northwest 23rd Street.
Good afternoon. Please state your name and address for the record and then speak to your application.
I'm Jess Schweinberg with Metro Signs, 401 North Ann Arbor.
Hi, I'm Shelley Bensinger. I'm here in representation of Putnam City West, 2105 North Rolling Ridge, Bethany, Oklahoma.
First off, Buster Meeks, the principal of Putnam City West, and Kathy Hell, the finance manager, want to extend our apologies for not being able to attend the meeting personally. They had a district administration meeting that kept them from being able to attend. We're requesting 3 considerations on this particular sign at Putnam City West High School. First consideration, we're requesting to maintain the height of the existing sign less, I emphasize less, 3 foot. Present sign is 19 foot overall height. The sign has been there. There's no documentation of exact date when it was installed, but there's a dedication plaque at the base of the sign. Concrete dedication plaques was donated by the seniors of the 1998 graduating class, so it's safe to assume it's been there for well over 14, 15 years. Our second consideration is the square footage of the overall sign. And this is going to be kind of tricky to try to explain to you why I'm saying overall square footage. The sign itself is actually smaller than the existing sign that's there. The existing sign is 12 foot overall width. With the logo on the top, it's 9 foot overall height, which by the way that's Oklahoma City zoning figures square footage, if you square it out 4 lines, it's 108 square foot. Sometimes they allow us to do the main body, which is 6 by 12, is 72 square foot, and then square out the logo, which adds another 11, so it's about 70, 80 some square foot for that sign, which is, as it is well under the 100 square foot allowable in residential zoning. The total square footage of the sign that we have proposed for the school, with all the deco accents from above the pole cover up, is right at 72 square foot. The battle is we have, per their recommendation, have incorporated a 6 foot wide pole cover to bring the total aesthetic appearance of the sign together, which by Oklahoma City zoning ordinances, anything over 3 foot has to be incorporated in calculating the square footage of the sign. So with that being said, this sign with 6 foot pole covers 127.5 square foot. Go one step farther. If you were to calculate the square footage of the existing pole cover, which is 2 foot by 10 foot, and if you squared it off the way that we typically have to do it on the sign, the present sign, square footage wise, is 108 square foot, or 128 square foot. So it's actually, this sign, visible square footage area is a half a square foot under what they have now, by the way we calculate it. There is two options we could go as far as the pole cover goes. If you grant us the variance to maintain the height less than 3 foot, we can put two 32, 33-inch pole covers side by side with a void between them, which is feasible and wouldn't be counted as square footage. If you wouldn't grant the 6 foot, we could do that with no problem. We'll clearly be under the square footage, but the signage itself is grossly under the restrictions for R1 zoning. The message center for this particular property, R1 zoning allows 50 square foot. We're under the 50 square foot. I believe if you calculate it out, it's about 28, 29 square foot. So we are asking for the consideration to maintain the height less 3 foot, incorporate the 6 foot wide pole cover to it to aesthetically bring the sign together. The third one is the tricky one. We're requesting the level 3 usage of the sign of the message center. Presently under R1 zoning and O2 zoning, you're restricted on the hours of operation, you're restricted to no animation, no movement, and an 8-second hold. In my feeling, the intent of that, as I was involved in a lot of those meetings, was most of the residential zoning and office zonings are surrounded by residentials, and it becomes an issue and offensive to the people that live there. If you've had an opportunity to take a look at this particular piece of property, you've got residents that are to the east, you have residents that are to the north. Naturally, everybody to the south is so far removed because of the school and the size of this particular piece of property. They're hundreds of yards away. All the residential homes that are within eyesight, if indeed they could see it, exceed the 250-foot setback that is restrictive under R1 zoning. But on top of that, there's trees, outbuildings that block every one of them. The people across the street to the north are elevated probably 275, 300 foot away, and they've got trees that are probably 70, 80 foot tall. You can't even see the sign as it is. The people to the east, the 3 or 4 homes that start from Council going to the south, they would have to really go outside their door, walk around to the back of the property, go onto the school property in order to even see the sign because of the fences and the trees that are there. Everything to the west is a park and the lake, and in a gated community that sits far enough off of Council Road that it should never be an issue as far as being a detriment or a eyesore to anybody that lives around there. It's important that the school be able to use this message center to its fullest capabilities. As a high school, as we all know, are not the normal typical school that goes for 6 hours a day and they're done. These students are going to school as early as 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning and getting home as late as 10 or 11 o'clock, depending on what the functions are. School needs to utilize the capabilities this both to communicate to the teachers, the students, and the parents. So I'd like for you to strongly consider all 3 options.
There's one letter in the record that was of encouragement for supporting it. You're not aware of anybody in protesting or?
We have not received anything other than what the city provided to us, that the one letter that was recommending it and encouraging it, along with the footnote on the bottom, sir.
So, any questions by the board?
Was the sign not to code, or was it put up there and the code was changed, or it's 3 foot higher than they're asking for? And our notes say that it's twice the height that it's supposed to be. I don't quite understand that.
You don't know about the existing sign or the proposed sign?
Yeah, that's my question about the existing
The
sign.
overall sign?
I guess what I didn't explain is the present R1 and forever R1 zoning restricts you to 100 square foot, 8 foot overall height. It's been our experience dealing with a lot of the Oklahoma City Metro schools primarily, and a lot of the independent schools that are within the Oklahoma City zoning, jurisdiction. A lot of the schools that had signs put up years ago, number one, there's the database and the history to research Oklahoma City is not available back that far. It's definitely not online. To assume that it was never permitted, I have a real difficult time that it had not been permitted. But as long as I've been in this business, which has been over 20 years, R1 zoning's always been restricted to 8 foot without asking for special consideration. Always has been 100 square foot without asking for special consideration.
I don't have any other questions. I'll make a motion to approve.
Yeah, I'll second.
Votes? The application's approved. Thank you.
Thank you, folks, very much.
Item number 4, case number 13759, request of Goodrich Wrecker for a variance to the conditional use regulations to permit an automotive vehicle impound yard located at 4429 South Magnolia Avenue.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Chris Kime with Foshee and Yaffe.
Travis Goodrich with Goodrich Record Service.
Just requesting a single variance application relative to the 300-foot residential requirement for an outdoor storage yard. I think within the application, noting that we're in a fairly industrialized area with tenants surrounding us that are engaging in similar uses of the property, but the very narrow application of this particular set of requirements would cause us, of course, to run afoul of existing ordinance. So seeking relief from that and a variance.
So you currently have a mechanic shop, a repair shop, and you want to make a...
It is actually in operation as an impound yard wrecker service that was brought to the attention, of course, that the 300-foot residential requirement would be problematic from a continuing standpoint.
Questions?
To the best of our knowledge, no, not only in the course of this present proceeding, but over time, as indicated, for the better part of the past decade while the business has been in operation.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Second. All in favor? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Item number 5, case number 13764, request of Richard Leonetti for a variance to the 5-acre minimum lot size located at 12801 South Pennsylvania Avenue.
Thank you. Richard Leonetti, 7829 South Youngs Boulevard, Oklahoma City. I'm representing myself and also current property owner Dennis Patterson. And this parcel of land has been in the Patterson family since the land run of 1889. So we request for lot split for a variance to the 5-acre minimum lot size in the agricultural district. And we have some design ideas to mitigate any backing out onto Pennsylvania from the driveway.
What are those ideas?
I have a couple of... The picture is of a current residence that's just about a half-mile south of that location.
So you're going to have 2 cut-ins off of the street that come into off of Pennsylvania that flow into one?
Yes.
You're wanting to?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
I'd make a motion to approve. Second.
Did that drawing show how wide the ingress and egress was? Is it 16 foot? Do you recall what the
I don't, no, and those are rough sketches, and of course, we'll go with the minimum standards on that. We'll meet or exceed those.
Doesn't even show, does it? Oh, it is. So it's 28 feet, and you will comply with this drawing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make a motion subject to compliance with the drawing. Do you second that?
All right.
Cast your votes. Your application is approved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Item number 6, case number 13765, request of Utility Tri-State, Inc., Canadian County Investments for a variance to the hard surface paving requirement located at 15200 Northwest 34th Street.
My name is John B. Lai, 15200 Northwest 34th. I'm the Vice President of Utility Tri-State and a member of Canadian County Investments. We're asking for a variance on the solid surface paving ordinance for a portion of our lot. We have a drawing, rough drawing of the lot. It's the 4th page in the document. There's a L shape that is the gravel, proposed gravel area. And that's, the L shape starts on the east side of the property and covers the south side of the property. The total lot size is approximately 16 acres. We have approximately 5 acres paved with a building on it, 22,000 square foot building. The remaining 11 acres we will use for excess trailer parking, storage, things like that. And we want to get a variance for changing the fixed paving or solid surface paving to a compacted gravel paving.
You make comment in your application about it being temporary, or you mean temporary by you are eventually going to pay this, or do you mean it temporary by
the length of time the trailers are there.
Okay.
Trailers move in and move out of this location.
Okay.
And is compacted gravel not so prone to gravel dust? And
Compacted gravel is less prone to gravel dust than just drop gravel, but then there's also treatments you can do to it. The contract that we have before us is a compacted gravel that will really reduce that, because the gravel dust does damage in our shop. It creates problems in our shop, so we try and avoid that.
I would be most comfortable if we're, look at approving this, is that there's some stipulation that it'd be a compacted gravel that minimizes gravel dust.
And will, excuse me, I'm sorry. Will it include the treatment that you talked about?
It will be compacted, yes.
Okay.
Make a motion to that effect to approve the application subject to the compacted gravel that minimizes the gravel dust.
Okay, cast your votes. Your application is approved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Item number 7, case number 13767, request of MVRN for a variance to the maximum sign height and building setback located at 4335 West Reno Avenue.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Hickman. Represent the applicant MVRN, who is the owner of the property, and also under the name of Galaxy Recreation Home Center operates the business there. We are requesting 2 variances in order to build a freestanding sign. There's not an existing freestanding sign on the property. Accurate Neon Sign representatives are here that are building the sign, as well as Galaxy. If we start by looking at the site plan, the concept is to build the sign next to the front portion of the building, and it incorporates landscaping around the sign structure. The first variance is along Reno. There was a recent change to the ordinance to require 125-foot setback from the center line of the Reno Avenue. In order to make this sign functional, we need to place it approximately 88 feet from the center line of Reno, which would require a 37-foot variance from that restriction. Now, the underlying reason and the basis essentially for the hardship is the fact that this is the site of this property has a building constructed on it in 1959 and has a deep gully off to the west side of the property as well. And because of those 2 requirements, or those 2 existing structures and issues on the property, we simply cannot place the sign the 125 feet back from the center line of Reno, or it would be halfway back on the backside of the building, and in a sense out of alignment with the rest of the structures on the property, as well as along Reno Avenue itself. If you look at the actual structure now, the restrictions on this type of zoning in the Oklahoma City ordinance is for 40 feet height. We are requesting a 60-foot tall sign. That's in part because of the way that the building is constructed. It was built at the very front of the property line back in 1959 when these ordinances did not exist, as well as to the east of the property. You probably saw some of the pictures in your package. There are fully mature trees in existence, as well as numerous other signs on adjoining property that simply would completely obstruct the view of the sign if it was constructed at 40 feet in height. And I actually have some photographs I can show you if you would like, where we did some mock simulations of a 40-foot sign and showing how they are essentially hidden behind behind the existing trees. This is if the sign was the pictures that are being passed around. The first one, you can't even see where the sign would be because it's obstructed by the trees and the existing like Lork Ranch type on-premise freestanding signs. In the second picture, you can kind of see a little bit of a part of an orange bucket, if you will, that the sign guys use when they go up in the buckets to go work on their signs. You can see just a little snippet of it kind of hanging out there. We did that just so you could see that the height and the setback are really both necessary in order to be able to place the sign at a place on the property because of the existing building and of the existing development that's occurred around in order for it to be visible and functional. Essentially, the owners are trying to utilize the sign using 21st century technology in order to make the site more functional and usable for them in lieu of having to look for some other location, potentially relocate the business. And for those reasons, we'd ask that you grant both variances so we can construct the sign.
I could be most comfortable with the variance regarding the center line because of the proximity of the building. But the overall height, I am prone to object to. And because, first of all, many of your neighbors have abided by that 40-foot overall height. These look like Bradford pears or another, fully leafed out tree that are obstructing your sign when it's set at 40 feet. And, I would never advocate cutting down trees, but I mean, landscaping can be modified. Landscaping's not a forever thing. And so my position at this point would be to look favorably upon the center line variance request, but not the change in overall height.
If I could just make one comment. We did include in your package information evidencing several existing signs in the area, and many of them have an overall height of 60 feet or greater relative to their above ground height, as well as being located closer than 125 feet to the center line. The height is a very important part, and the trees and the existing signs that are on the adjacent property are just that. They're on the adjacent property, and we would have no control.
Are these signs included in our packet? Were these all variance-approved signs, or are these signs that someone just put up on their own initiative? That's my question.
Well, I assume that they are approved signs. I mean, I didn't represent those clients, those companies, but they are signs that are on, like I believe one of them you can see from the pictures is Lork Ranch. And the way in which where those signs are located and configured for westbound traffic, if our sign is limited to 40 feet between the trees and the existing on-premise signs, the view of our sign would be severely obscured.
Any other questions
I'd almost have to agree. I think a 60-foot sign is just too high. And I would have to agree with the statement that's just been made. I don't have any problem with the setback, but the height, I can't go with. And I would make a motion to that. Leave the ordinance on the 40-foot sign and a variance on the 125-foot setback.
If I could make one other final request, if the board's willing to consider 50 feet in lieu of 60 feet, that at least would give us some additional flexibility and maybe make it to where the client would be willing to go forward with the sign.
I would suggest that you split them up and vote individually on the variances.
Okay, on each one of them? Okay. I'll make a motion on the setback to approve the setback.
Second.
All those in favor? Setback is approved.
I'll make a motion to deny the height and keep it at 40 feet.
What if they wanted to do 50? Would you be flexible?
40 feet. I'd rather stay within the ordinance.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. Thank you, sir.
Item number 8, case number 13768, request of Alan Porter for a variance to the minimum access aisle width standards located at 201 Robert S. Kerr Avenue.
Good afternoon. I'm Alan Porter. I'm the owner's agent for, BOK Plaza. BOK Plaza has an existing parking garage along Robert S. Kerr. You enter off of Robert S. Kerr, and it's in the lower level of the building. For years, the bank has occupied the lower level of the tower. They have since pulled all their operations up to the upper floors. And because of the space involved, it's been extremely difficult to lease that space. Plus, as you all probably know, during the ensuing years, it's been increasingly difficult to find parking in the downtown area. And so we have come up with a scheme where we can add 41 parking spaces to their existing parking garage. This is the north part of the parking garage as we propose it. It would be bounded on the right by Robinson and on the north by 3rd Street. This has been reviewed by Mike Wilson with the fire department, and he had no problems with it. We have a building permit that, pending your decision, will either be issued or not. The only issue per se is the driveway going back to the spaces.
So the city and emergency services, the fire service and EMS and all have cleared this doesn't create any problems for them in terms of access to that area?
I've not talked to EMS, did talk to the fire department. This is a sprinklered space completely. And the main entrance into the tower at that level would be down here in the lower left-hand corner.
Because it seems absent, a problem with the fire department or the ambulance service, that the greatest inconvenience would be that for larger vehicles, somebody may have to wait. It's about a 100-foot drive, and an inconvenience would be, the consequence that might be faced. But I think, we need to make sure that ambulance service is not affected and has no problem. And certainly, the city and city vehicles, fire service and police have no problem.
JJ, is that something you can comment on, or is that something we need to have him continued and come back with that?
We can't comment on what the EMS would do, but the fire marshal's office is blessed off on it.
Okay. Are you comfortable with that?
I am, because if the fire service, I mean, if they can get a fire truck down there, then they can certainly get an ambulance down there, I would think, so.
Any other questions?
Make a motion to approve the application.
All those in favor? Thank you, sir. You're approved.
Thank you.
Item number 9, case number 13755, request of Andrea and Scott Brakefield for a variance to the 5-acre minimum lot size and the 150-foot minimum lot width located at 12317 West Britton Road.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Name and address for the record, please.
I'm sorry, Andrea Brakefield, 12317 West Britton Road, Yukon, Oklahoma. My husband and I own about 12.25, I believe, acres, and of that land, there's about an acre and a half probably of land that's not accessible to us from the other part of our property. We own, I don't know if you all have a picture of it. If you don't, I have one here. Doesn't really quite show where the pond is and everything, but...
Do you have another picture you can hand it to?
Sure, I have this, like, aerial view. So essentially, they own part of the dam, and we own the other part of the dam. But anyway, we are looking to sell my parents about an acre, and we're flexible. We could go an acre and a half if an acre's not suitable for you, to my parents so that they can maintain that side of the property and be closer to us. We feel that in doing that, we stay within the agricultural requirements of, we have 12 acres, so essentially the density of the area would not change. There would be 2 homes on 12.25 acres. My sweet neighbors are here to voice their protests, and I'd like to address their concerns, if I might. They sent a letter in, and I just kind of like to go through it. The first I'd like to address is the James and Pat McDaniel letter that they sent in. Their first request for my variance to be denied is due to the awkwardness of the acre that I'm looking to sell to my parents. And they're very accurate with that. There is a drop-off and a ravine there, but there is enough land there suitable for a double-wide structure, the septic and the well. I've gone to Mike Miller with plan review, and he has approved all of these things and has even let me know that I don't need even a flood study because the land there is sufficient and adequate for what we're trying to do, which also addresses the second issue that they have, their concern. The third is that cosmetically it's not acceptable to the area. Right next door to us there is also a double-wide mobile home. Across the streets from us there are 2 homes that are 1,000 square feet or less. I'm not really sure. They're smaller. Our home is obviously very large, and the home that Pat and James share is a ranch-style home that is it's beautiful. It's a nice property that they have. Their fourth concern, but anyway, so my point in that is that there are neighbors next to us who have a double wide as well, and on Britton Road, I just feel like that would be acceptable for us to do that. Their fourth concern is that they fear granting variances of this side will set precedents for future requests. We do have 55 acres down the road that's being sold in 5-acre lot sizes. Were they to try to get a variance for also 1 acre, I agree with their concern. That would be something I wouldn't want, and I know they don't want either. The difference between that and us is that it would be two structures on a whole of 12.25 acres. So essentially each structure is within the 5-acre minimum, and we're not trying to, go below that. I'd also like to point out that across the street on Britton Road and Piedmont Road, there is about 80-plus acres that's zoned R1, and it's just right across the street as well. I also have a letter from Irene Littlejohn that I believe I've addressed hers as well, as far as 1 acre not being suitable enough for a double wide in the well and the septic, when Mike Miller with plan review has accepted that. So, and essentially that land, we've owned the property for 2.5 years. We can't access it from our side of the property. We haven't mowed it or brush hogged it or really taken care of that just because of that reason. So we feel like if we put my parents over there, they can kind of maintain that and keep it up, and I think it will make the street in whole look nicer and be a nicer property for everybody.
Questions of Ms. Brakefield?
I do. Are there reasons other than just maintenance of that part of your land?
I'm sorry?
Are there any other reasons for having your parents there other than just the upkeep of that area?
We would like my parents to be there for numerous reasons, just, with the family and with my mother. She's here. She's been handicapped for a long time, and I would like her to be closer. We'd like her to be there for the kids and to maintain the property. Also, we have to sell it in order financially to make the improvements and put something there. I think just the well and the septic and the land and all that would be like $15,000 just to get that put in.
Just occurs to me there might be some options other than selling it to the parents to, and I understand the concerns about more mobile homes in an area where you've got nice, large lots and beautiful homes. And then maybe we could look at something where, the placement of the home is somewhat temporary. It's kind of a hardship, like a medical hardship or something like that.
The medical hardship variance, limited it in duration to 3 years or 5 years. They
Something
come
like
back and not have a sale of the property.
And then in terms of, the financial, remuneration you would have received from your parents, perhaps, they could help your family in another way financially in lieu of a sale. But I'm thinking of the neighbors and their objections, and I think they have merit. I don't think you want, to set the precedent for having mobile homes placed in this area, as a regular practice. But I think, we do have the ability to look at a circumstance, a unique circumstance, and maybe address it. There's a provision, that we've dealt with before where there's a medical hardship where it's necessary for younger family members to be, in close proximity to older family members to help with their care and so forth.
Would you be, I think it's a 3-year variance, correct? Would you be open to a 3-year medical hardship variance and then come back before this board 3 years, and if the circumstances for the hardship are still in place, you would be heard a hearing and probably given another 3 years? Is that something you'd be open to?
It's something I wish would be open to, and I've talked to my dad about that option. We've looked at the medical variance, and he financially, he needs to own the land to finance it and put it all up, and he wants to be the provider and for my mom, and he doesn't want to live off our land. He's proud, and so we've looked at that option, and we could even go up in acreage if we need to. But even if we wanted to sell them 5 acres and could sell them 5 acres, because they really can't access the other part of the land without having to build something or somehow create an easement maybe from our driveway all the way back to their side, we didn't see that it would be feasible even to sell them 5 acres or anybody 5 acres for that matter, but rather keep it around 1 and maintain 2 acres 2 properties per the 12.25 acres.
I'm sympathetic, but with this application being protested, we're providing you with an avenue to go down, and you could even lease the parcel to him or do something like that. That's between y'all. The economics is not through the purview of this commission, but we're obviously going to hear from your neighbors, but we could provide you today with that avenue to go down. So maybe while the neighbors are speaking, you might want to.
It seems to me you have 2 options. One is, while we listen to your neighbors, is to consider a medical variance, or 2, ask for a continuance and consider amending it to 5 acres. Because there are protests here and there are concerns about adequate water, and you might address that. Is there adequate water?
There is adequate water. I mean, we've never had a water shortage, even in the drought, that we had 2 years ago where we had no rain and, record 101 plus temperatures. We've never had any shortages or been told that we have to watch our water supply, and there's not that many residents that are on our well. So I didn't feel like that was a valid claim at all.
Sure.
So once they speak, do I have a chance to come back up here?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We're sympathetic to your mother's needs and your father's needs, and we'd like to hear what the other side has to say, and then you'll get an opportunity to come up
Okay.
and speak again.
Okay,
Mr. and Mrs.
thank
McDaniel, you can approach and,
Yes.
McDaniel, I'm sorry.
I have.
Please state your name and address.
Okay, it's Pat McDaniel, or Patricia McDaniel, and I live at 12320 West Britton Road, which is across the road, and my brother's here that lives also across the road. We live on a centennial farm that my great-grandparents homesteaded. And so, to address, I think she's already addressed several things, but we're real concerned about what the area looks like, and there's been several farms that have been sold and divided, and we figured there's going to be some more divided into 5-acre tracts or larger. And we just did not want to set a precedence. But our main concern, too, is that this is right across our road. And as you can see, I've tried to write Britton Road, and she said that she's had it to the Planning Commission, but it's going to be sitting right on Britton Road. I mean, there's no way, because the creek on the east is a drainage from Highway 4 that comes down that road and goes out, and the drainage on the west side is what comes off of our farm and the areas on that side. There's a drop where they meet, then it goes into their pond and their lake. So this is going to be sitting right on Britton Road. And, you know, if it was a structure other than a mobile home, to us, 5 years, 10 years, they're going to be selling that. Who's to know what's going to become of that property? If it was a handicap, we would, 3 years, we could look at a mobile home. But I can just see starting up mobile homes. And further down Britton Road, closer to Highway 81, or there's some mobile home, little villages and things all along there. And that's our main concern is, and she said there wasn't enough room. We questioned how they would have a driveway, well, septic tank, and the building structure. Because if you have a mobile home, you usually have to have storage buildings or something for storage.
Would you be willing, if we continued this, to maybe work with some type of compromise with her? Or are you unwilling to, if it's 2 acres or 3 acres or?
Well, the only problem is they're 5 acres. This is that little piece of land that I'm showing you there in those pictures is the only thing that can be built. It's all pond and lake, so there's no way of going.
But even if they had more land and complied with the ordinance, this would be the only part of the property that's developed, so it's irrelevant whether they have an acre or 5 acres.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, there's nothing we can do if it's 5 acres.
Right.
If it was 5 acres. No, we couldn't question it then.
Okay.
It's, no.
Any other questions for Ms. McDaniel? Ms. Brakefield? Go ahead, please.
The mobile home that she was speaking of that is located on the other side sets back off the road a long ways. It's got brick around it. It looks like a home. I think it's been established. It isn't licensed. I mean, it's a home. They pay taxes like that.
Okay.
And it is on at least 5 acres of land. And it's trees in front. You don't even see it.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Littlejohn's not here today, right?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
She's right. The property where we would put my parents' mobile home would be off the road. It wouldn't be set far back like the other mobile home that's there. But we would definitely want to put a very nice one up there. And her concern about what would happen to it in that time, the way we look at it is this would be something for my parents to stay in until they pass away. We're looking at this as their forever place with us. And when that does happen, we would keep that property in our family, either let our kids have it. I don't know if we could buy it back in. I don't know. But I know that my husband likes owning the property as a whole, but he sees this as a good way to get our parents out there and get that side of the property taken care of.
Have you spoken with your parents about either continuing it or applying for a medical hardship? If you could continue and maybe work something out economically with them on that, or ask for a medical hardship here today. I mean, those are the two options.
If we did the medical hardship, how long does that last, and when would I have to move on that?
It's really, they don't have a medical hardship in front of you. They haven't established the medical necessity, but you can grant a variance for a term of years if you want, for whatever you feel is appropriate, 3, 5 years.
So we could make this limited in duration? But it wouldn't be a medical per se, it would just be a limited. Ms. McDaniel, is that something you'd be, if we were to grant her for a period of time a variance to allow her parents to live there, and then they would have to come back and reestablish the same facts and circumstances, you would have an opportunity to object. So like a 1, 2, 3 year period where this mobile home could exist on this lot split, and then you could, at the end of that process, if you're uncomfortable or something, you could appear back before this.
So it would still belong to them, and that it wouldn't be a separate little acreage that they could sell somebody else.
That's correct. They could not sell it. It'd still be continuous.
No,
wait.
You can't restrict the ownership.
Yeah, you can't.
Okay. So they would be able to sell it?
Yes.
The thing that would happen is, if they sold the acreage, the mobile home would be limited in duration that it could stay there.
It's still, the variance would still,
In
the
other
time
words-
would still apply.
Yeah, exactly. So if we allowed the variance, and we said the mobile home can be there for 1 year, and you come back and attempt to renew the variance, that gives you a chance to see what it's like, how it's working, if it's a good thing or a bad thing. But they would be able to sell the property.
The property would be sold with a contingency on it that it would be only for that period of time. It wouldn't go with that, it would go with the land rather than the person.
It runs with the land, yes, sir.
I mean, we can see that they think they'll buy it back. I mean, or they'll take it back. But it could be she has a sibling. It could be divided up, and I mean, who knows what's happened in 5, 10, 15 years. And I just hate to see little 1 acre variances allowed. I mean, I could see maybe
I mean, the other thing they could do is they could sell them a life estate.
Yeah, I mean,
the property
ground
would back
lease,
to them. I can't tell you what to do, but one thing you might consider is seeking a continuance today so you don't get denied. Look at your other options of granting them a life estate, limiting the period of time that the mobile home could be there, and then maybe renewing your application or modifying your application and coming back in front of the board.
Now, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you were suggesting. If you were to grant a variance that we could sell them the acre and therefore put them out there and proceed, and then we would just come back and reapply to let them stay there?
The mobile home, not the land, the mobile home would be the conditional use.
You may want to talk to an attorney, because one of your other alternatives is to just sell them a life estate. They only own the land as long as they're living, and then it reverts back to you.
Okay.
So I would encourage you to consider a motion to continue this and maybe come back to our next meeting, because if we vote and you're denied,
then it's over. Okay, so I guess then that's what I'll do.
Move we continue it is 15 or whatever's.
Let's do it to the next one.
The one after 15.
Yeah, September meeting.
But before we do that, I'm sorry, I just really wanted to be clear. So is it possible to do what you were saying? Does that pretty much...
It is possible. I think the board is telling you to seek legal advice and then come back with that opinion from that lawyer and present your circumstances to the board.
Okay.
Yeah, my thinking is you may not have explored all options, so I'll move a continuance to September, whatever, 5th.
I'll second that.
Okay.
All in favor?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kathy?
Item number 10, case number 13763, appeal of Johnny and Lisa Penton of the decision of the Historic Preservation Commission regarding the denial of a certificate of appropriateness to construct a 2-story garage with connected deck and stairs located at 800 Northwest 39th Street.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Derek Insminger. I am legal counsel for Mr. and Mrs. John Penton. I'm joined here by Mr. Penton. They're the owners of a home in Crown Heights located at 800 Northwest 39th Street. We're here today on an appeal from a decision from the Historic Preservation Committee rejecting the Pentons' request to construct a two-story garage on their property. I'll start by noting that the board's review of this case is de novo. Now, on June 14th, my firm submitted a letter to the board detailing our positions on appeal. I'll address those in turn here today as well. I'll start by outlining some material facts. I'll first note that a fact that I don't think was considered by the HPC that I can tell from the recording of that hearing. The garage that's currently on the Pentons' property is, in fact, a two-story attached garage.
Say that again. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I apologize. The garage currently on the Pentons' property is a two-story attached garage.
Detached?
Attached.
Attached, okay.
Yes. Additionally, at least 25, and by our count 28, two-story garages exist in the Crown Heights addition. There are multiple two-story garages in the same legal block as the Pentons' property, that is Block 6. And those two properties are 1001 Northwest 38th Street and 905 Northwest 38th Street. There is also a two-story or one-and-a-half-story garage in the same physical block as the Pentons' property. That is the 800 block of 39th Street. Physical, I'll say physical block, meaning the block is bounded by the streets. That property is just directly to the west down 39th Street, from the Pentons' property. And I'll note something I didn't beforehand, just to give you a visual. The Pentons' home is on the intersection of Chartel and 39th Street, and that it's the southwest corner of that intersection. So then the house on 39th that I referred to with a two-story garage is just to the west down the street in the same physical block. There's also notably a two-story garage on the property just across Chartel from the Pentons' property. And it may not technically be in the physical block because it's across Chartel, but it shares Chartel as a boundary. So there's a common boundary between the Pentons' house and this property, which is at 716th Northwest 39th Street. That's on the southeast corner of Chartel and 39th Street. I believe we have a photograph of that garage attached to our letter that we submitted to the board. Now, I'll start with our first point on appeal, and it refers to Section 4.4.10 of the guidelines, the Oklahoma City Historic Preservation Design and Sustainability Standards and Guidelines. This guideline was discussed at length during the initial HPC hearing on June 5th. It states, quote, a replacement garage may be 2 stories tall when the original garage was 2 stories, or if located in a block where a 2-story or a 1.5-story garages are dominant or occurring on adjoining property. That last part of that guideline is the subject of our appeal. It provides that a 2-story garage is proper if there is a 2-story garage found on, quote, adjoining property. Now, that portion of that guideline was discussed at length at the HPC hearing. I think the committee struggled actually with the term adjoining and what that meant. I think there was some note of the fact that they've struggled with it before in the past. Ultimately, I think that in our case, the HPC interpreted it to mean directly touching or requiring directly touching. That is, if a property is only adjoining if it shares a common boundary or is directly touching the property of the applicants. On appeal, we submit that was too narrow of an interpretation of the term adjoining, which we've outlined in our letter. But that's what this issue comes down to, is what is the meaning of that term?
I don't want to interrupt, but let me ask you this, and I enjoyed reading your analysis of adjoining versus abutting. But if you look at 4.410, would you agree with me that if it's located within a block, you could have 2-story, correct?
Say that one more time.
It says, or if located in a block where 2-story or 1.5-story garages are dominant. So if it was in a block, you could do it. if there were two-story garages within a block, correct?
Whether they're dominant or not, I don't know, but I don't know if that's referring to legal block or physical block.
Sure. But then it says, or occur on an adjoining property. That last phrase?
Correct.
Would you agree with me that adjoining property would have to be something less than a block?
Something less than a legal block, which is bigger than a physical block, correct. A legal block is block 6 in this case.
And if we adopt your position on adjoining versus abutting, would 716 Northwest 39th be within a block of your property?
Technically, it's not in the same physical block because it's across from Chartel. It's on the 700 block of Chartel. But it is contiguous, in our opinion, in that it shares a common boundary with the Penton's property.
You're using the right-of-way to get to the common boundary, though, correct, when you say adjoin?
Correct. But
Chartel, understand, is the boulevard at that point.
that is correct.
Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to see what your argument was, make sure I understood it.
Well, and I'll get to it, but I think the HPC's prior interpretation of adjoining and application of that term supports our position as well, and I'll get to that. The term is not defined in the code, so the code provides that we can then look to just the typical usage of the term. And as outlined in our letter, the dictionary definition supports a broader interpretation or definition beyond just directly touching, and dictionary definition will also support neighboring as a synonym for the term adjoining. And that's our position here, is that it's broader than directly touching. It can include neighboring. And then, as Mr. Stonecipher mentioned, if you looked at some of the other terms that are used in the guidelines, it also supports our position. The term abutting is a defined term in the guidelines, and that requires a common boundary. And if the drafters of the guidelines required a common boundary in the guideline we're discussing, they could have used the term abutting. But
adjoining means something different than abutting.
Exactly. It must mean something broader as we see it. But then really perhaps the most persuasive point, I think, in support of our position is the HPC's treatment in prior applications or other applications of the same guideline in similar cases. We discussed in our letter submitted to the board a case, it's HPCA 13-18. It involved a home at 900 Northwest 16th Street. I believe that's in either Heritage Hills or Mesta Park. I think it's in Mesta Park.
Exhibit 1 in you guys' packet.
And that's HPCA 13-00018. Is that what you said?
Say that one more time.
HPCA 13-00018.
Yes, I just said 18, but yes, that's correct.
Exhibit B, pardon me.
Okay.
And in that case, the facts were similar to the Penton's case in that there was not a two-story garage on a property directly touching the applicants. And that's clear from the staff report, which we quoted in our letter. The staff report says, quote, "The only nearby two-story garage is within the same block but not directly adjoining." So there's a couple things we can take from that quote. One, it confirms that there was not a two-story garage on a property directly touching the applicant's property in that case, similar to our case. But also the modifier directly, as it's used before adjoining, supports our interpretation of adjoining, and that it's, if adjoining in fact means in and of itself directly touching, the modifier directly really is superfluous and unnecessary in that case. But then the bigger, more salient point is that the HPC ultimately approved that application on the basis of the fact that there was a two-story garage in the same physical block but not directly touching. And in doing so made a finding that, quote, that the other two-story garage in the same block but not directly touching, quote, does adjoin the property. And that was in the HPC's findings. So that case, as we see it, is very similar to our case. There's a two-story garage in the same physical block but not directly touching. That's what we have here. In fact, I would submit that the Penton's case is actually an easier case than that one because there is this two-story garage directly across Chartel that is the next home to the east of the Penn's house. Maybe not technically in the same physical block, but the next house to the east. So our position is that fundamental fairness would require that the HPC definition, interpretation, and application of 4.410 be consistent, and that the same application, the more broad application that was used in this home in Mesta Park should be applied here to the Penton's request to construct a two-story garage on their property. Our next argument involves another separate section of the guidelines, that is 4.4.3. That section provides that, quote, construction of a replacement garage should approximate the original configuration, form, massing style, placement, and detail of the former garage. Former really being the operative word there. Notably, the drafters of the guidelines did not use the term original as is used in other guidelines. The term is former. Now, this issue, from looking at and viewing the recording of the hearing in front of the HPC, I don't think was considered. But the current garage on the Penton's property is a two-story garage. And under this guideline, it seems simple that they're replacing a two-story garage with another two-story garage, and former being the operative word, and allowing them to do that instead of using original, which would, in this case, I would submit that we can see that there's no evidence that there was originally a two-story garage on this property, but there currently is one.
Now, let me stop you there just to make sure I follow this. In section 4.4.3, it talks about a former garage you can replace with what was there formerly. So you right now have a two-story garage and you want to replace that with a two-story garage, correct?
Correct.
And then if we look at 4.10, it talks about an original garage. Correct? And so what you're saying is that the two ordinances, one focuses on former and the other focuses on original, correct?
Right. And 4.4.10 deals with when someone can construct a two-story garage, really regardless of what's existing on the property. I guess it allows for it if there's originally a two-story garage on the property. This separate section, it doesn't specifically note anything about the height of the garages. It just says that a garage can be constructed as long as it's consistent with the configurations and characteristics of the prior garage.
So when we're dealing with an original garage, we need to focus on adjoining property. But when we're dealing with a former garage, which is what you want to replace this garage with a two-story garage, we're not bound by that adjoining property concept under 4.4.3. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Okay.
It can, yeah, exactly. They're exclusive of one another as guidelines, but yes.
And I watched some of the tape. I didn't see any discussion, and I might have missed it, as to some analysis of section 4.4.3. Did they discuss that?
I think that's correct. I didn't either. And
I saw that there was, I think, a 4.410 discussion, but not a 4.43 discussion. Is that accurate?
that is correct. I think that, and I noted at the beginning, I think the fact that there's an existing two-story garage was not considered in the HPC hearing the way it should have been. And so that is one of our points of error, that under 4.4.3, I agree it wasn't discussed and considered as I saw it. And because the Penns have a former garage, two-story garage, it would fit under that guideline. Now, as I've outlined, I think the Penns application is proper under the guidelines, and their request to construct a two-story garage is proper and should be granted under the guidelines. Nevertheless, the guidelines are only one of the factors that the HPC is supposed to consider. It's one of 7 factors, other factors being purpose and intent of historic preservation, degree that the proposed work would isolate the property from its surroundings. And I submit that those additional factors also weigh in favor of the Penton's request. As I noted before, there's approximately 28 two-story garages in the Crown Heights addition, and there's currently a two-story garage directly across from Chartel. Now, granted, that's not in the same physical block, but when you're looking at other factors as in regards to isolating properties from its surroundings, I think it's a salient point, in that if you're driving up Chartel northbound and you approach 39th Street, on your east you're going to see a two-story garage. according to the HPC, the Penton should not have a two-story garage under the guidelines. Well, that just serves to isolate those two houses from one another and have them differ in their appearance of the garages. And then as a final point, I'll note that the code also contemplates consideration of unique circumstances. And in this case, there is a unique safety factor that I think should be considered. Currently, with the Penton's home, there's the only second-story rear exit is a steep, sort of treacherous and difficult to navigate narrow staircase. And the proposed two-story garage would have a breezeway from the second story across to the garage, which would provide a much safer, quicker exit from the rear, that second-story portion of the home. So there's a safety consideration as well that would weigh in favor of granting the Penton's request in this case. So for those reasons, I'd recommend and respectfully ask the board to reverse the HPC's determination that her rejection of the Penn's request to build a two-story garage on their property.
Katie's here to talk as well, but questions of Mr. Ensminger before we move on.
I would just add that my wife is actually the physical legal owner of the home, but we went to great lengths to determine what the spirit and intent of historic preservation goals and guidelines are, and we charged our architect with all manner of honoring the spirit and guidelines of HP. If you haven't, I'd welcome you to, I invite you, and we'll make available those architectural plans. We spent a great deal of money. We'll spend more money on the remodel and the construction than we did on the original home. It's a considerable investment on our part. We're averaging up not only our block but the neighborhood, and it is certainly within the spirit and guideline of what is taking place among those that have chosen to do so in Crown Heights. It's architecturally pleasing, and the two-story garage is well within the spirit of 1931 construction guidelines. And there were but a handful of original two-story garages built in 1930s at original construction. Our home had a garage where this garage would be constructed that was long since demolished, but not there in 31. The existing two-story garage that we'd like to replace with the new one is back in the spot where there existed a previous garage. Again, considerable averaging up of the property here, and a huge, huge improvement over what is visually available to the eye as you drive north or south down Chartel and look at my house. And I think the plans would be proof in the pudding of what we intend to do. So,
any other questions? Katie, do you have it?
I'm Katie Friddle. I'm the Historic Preservation Officer, staff to the Historic Preservation Commission in the Planning Department, 420 West Main Street, and just wanted to clarify some of the points that have been raised about the Commission's discussion and the things that they consider. First, on the discussion or lack thereof of Guideline 4.4.3, I don't think that was discussed at all because I don't think anyone on the staff or on the Commission thought that they were in any way proposing a replacement in kind of the existing garage. That guideline talks about matching or approximating configuration, form, massing, style, placement, and detail of an existing garage. What they have is I would say a one-story attached garage that is part of a two-story house. What they proposed is a detached, freestanding two-story garage that looks absolutely nothing like the existing, other than the fact that they have garage doors. So I don't think that that was ever even raised as something for us to consider, because that guideline talks about, that's what we refer to when people are tearing down an existing garage and building back something that looks just like it on the same footprint. It's really not relevant to what their proposal included. On the discussion of adjoining, the Commission did look to the definition that's in Webster's Dictionary, which is touching or bounding at a point or line, and then to go on from there. Bounding, which is part of that definition, is to set limits or bounds to, forming the boundary of, and didn't feel that the closest two-story garage to this property, which is on the other side of Chartel, was close enough to be considered adjoining. The case that they refer to that was approved just prior to this one with a garage where there was also a question of adjoining, those two properties, the property of that applicant and then the property with the two-story garage, were touching at the southwest corner of the applicant's property, or possibly not touching, at the southwest corner of the applicant's property and the northeast corner of the property with the two-story garage. Different maps showed different things. On some it looked like they were most definitely touching and the property lines met for a good distance. On some other maps and some other site plans it didn't look like they were touching. Staff called it into question, but the commission felt that it was close enough to consider it adjoining, and they had no other issues with the design of the garage and felt it was appropriate, so that one was approved. In this case, they didn't feel that other two-story garages met the definition of adjoining. The issue of the guideline saying or that two-story garages are dominant on the block was also raised. The applicant has stated that there are, I believe, 3 within the legal or physical block, and with at least 20 properties, we didn't feel that 3 garages constituted being a dominant characteristic of the block, so it didn't meet that guideline either. I think because the commission felt that it was very clear that those requirements for having a two-story garage were not met, there wasn't a lot of additional discussion about design elements of the garage, but staff did raise several concerns, and there are guidelines referenced in the staff report as possibly not being met by the design, and those are things like new garages being secondary to the primary structure, materials meeting the requirements for new construction. The breezeway was also treated kind of part and parcel with the garage, although the commission could certainly have pulled that out to consider it separately. Elevated breezeways, walkways, whatever you want to call it, are not something that are addressed specifically in our guidelines, but are certainly not a historic characteristic that we've ever seen in any of our districts. The commission did not feel it was something that was appropriate. We did not see any documentation that it was needed to address egress issues. That's something that the commission always takes into consideration if there are safety concerns, and can consider those things as unique circumstances, but it was not presented in that way, and I've never heard anything that required an elevated walkway connecting one building to another for a means of egress. Let me just make sure there weren't any other points I wanted to make sure to cover. I also wanted to say that, as you all know, the Historic Preservation Commission isn't just straight zoning. It's not just if you have A plus B, you get to do C. Yes, there are specific guidelines that talk about if you have this, then this is appropriate, but there's also the overall concept of things that are historically appropriate for the district from a design perspective. Just because there are other two-story garages somewhere in the neighborhood doesn't mean that all of those are appropriate, and doesn't mean that it's appropriate for your building. Just because there's another one across the street doesn't mean that it's appropriate for your property. The applicant noted themselves in the commission meeting, I believe, that most of the two-story garages they identified were in fact not historic. They were more recently constructed, which is just all the more evidence that two-story garages are not probably appropriate for this property. So just saying that there are lots of other design issues beyond whether it's adjoining, whether it's dominant, that go into the consideration of whether or not to approve a two-story garage as proposed. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Not at this time.
How long has the two-story garage been there that they propose replacing?
That, do you know when the addition was constructed? I think it's on our...
It's in the existing two-story garage, which I would call a two-story garage, and then it matches footprints above and below in a similar fashion that what we construct matches footprints above and below. I believe it's in the 80s, early 80s.
I agree with
What I'm
that.
trying to figure out is, The two-story garage that exists there today, when was it built?
I believe in the early 80s.
Okay.
I also would question, I have walked the
Come up and speak, Mr. Penton.
Pardon me. I have walked the property at Mestre Park in the backyard. I did not find that the backyards adjoined, and I wonder whether or not a survey was done to determine if those properties are actually touched one another.
The property owner, I believe, at that property did kind of a limited survey to assess the property line and how far the garage needed to be.
No, you made the comment that you thought that they either were or weren't touching on certain maps. Visually, you can't see that they're touching today. Was a survey done to determine that maybe they're touching but we don't see it?
No, a property survey wasn't done to go out and look at that.
Okay, because visually you can't determine that those two lots touch one another on the Mestre Park house.
If you're at the property?
If you're at the property. Physically, you can't determine that, in fact, you would conclude that they're not touching.
Right.
So,
If I can address a few of the points.
Please, Mr. Ensminger.
Well, there's the issue of the dictionary definition of adjoining.
And just to be clear, the code says you go to the dictionary, for purposes of the record, the code says you go to the dictionary definition when it's silent, correct?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And we've cited in our letter to the board that the definition we've found includes both contiguous or neighboring as the definition of adjoining, neighboring being the operative term. But then also what wasn't addressed is if it does in fact require directly touching, that is the term adjoining, why not just use the term abutting, which is a defined term meaning the same thing? Why use adjoining? And then also the staffing report that I noted for the Mestre Park home that says has the modifier directly adjoining, or the modifier directly in front of adjoining, strongly suggesting that adjoining in and of itself doesn't mean that, or else that modifier is superfluous. And so I think we come back to adjoining has to mean something more than directly touching. Plus that staff, I'm sorry, Mr. Stone's talking.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
If we look at the staff report, May 1, 2013, page 4.
The staff report for this?
May 1,
Applicant?
2013. Is that the staff report for this property, or is that?
He's saying that's one that's analogous.
Analogous?
To this, yep.
Well, the
It's a
one thing I
home.
was going to ask, it talks about the materials and details of the garage. And was that discussed by the HPC, the materials and details of the new garage juxtaposed with the old garage, the 1980s garage?
It was not, because we did not view what they were proposing as being an attempt to replicate or approximate anything at the existing garage. If they had said, for structural reasons, we need to demolish and rebuild our attached garage, and we're going to match what's there, then we would certainly have considered that and would have discussed it. But as I said, and if you look at the plans for what the proposed garage was, there are virtually no similarities between the two structures other than that there's a garage door. So we never had the impression and never considered that what they were proposing was intended to replicate that. If they had been intending to replicate that, I think we would have said, you haven't done a very good job and you need to keep working, because it's not a similar structure in any way.
I might mention, if I were to have shown up with a plan that replicates the existing two-story garage, which was constructed not during an HP oversight, I would have known before I walked in the room that it would have never been approved. So you're absolutely correct that the two structures don't look anything alike, because the existing 80s structure is an eyesore. And what we're planning to build is architecturally consistent with the 1931 construction of the home in every way, shape, and form. So she's absolutely correct that the two don't look alike. They certainly
Do you agree with that they attempt to replicate the 1931 design and materials?
There are a lot of elements in the proposed garage that are drawn from the historic portion of the house. That's correct. Architecturally, it does a very nice job of referencing the house. As I said, we didn't get into a lot of discussion on the design in the commission meeting, because they kind of made the call on that a two-story garage was not going to be allowed. They did offer a continuance, but the applicant wanted to move forward with the denial so they could go ahead and appeal. If we had discussed the design, some of the guidelines that are referenced in the staff report as applicable do talk about garages and accessory buildings being secondary to the primary structure. So there might have been some discussion about, is the garage too ornate? Is it too much a replication of the house in a quote-unquote high-style garage, and should it be more modest? But as I said, because the decision was made on two-story or not, the discussion didn't really continue further into those details.
And then, do you have any evidence that you are going to submit in response to their contention that this is a unique circumstance based upon a safety factor?
I think that if that's something that you all feel is valid, the commission would certainly consider that. I don't have any way of imagining how having a two-story garage addresses any kind of safety concerns. I also don't know how having an elevated walkway connecting your house to said two-story garage addresses a safety concern that couldn't be addressed by lots of other less visibly noticeable means. But if there's some kind of formal requirement or documentation that that is in fact necessary for them to safely inhabit their house, the commission would certainly revisit that concern.
Well, I can think of several off the top of my head. I mean, fire, it's a 1931 stairwell that's about 3.5 feet wide and makes 3 turns to go from the first floor to the second floor. If there were a fire, it could be very, very difficult to gain access to that fire escape. Secondarily, if there were to be a home invasion or intruder of some kind, it would be highly advantageous to have another means of egress from the second floor.
And I don't disagree with that at all, but I think there are other options for egress than an elevated walkway connecting your house to a detached garage. I think you could have an exterior stair that just goes down the side of the house if that's really what's
Jeff?
needed.
For clarity, does that hazard exist today?
Yes, it does exist.
So were your architectural plans, this brings a question in my mind, were they submitted to the HPC for the garage and just not addressed because you never got there?
Yes, they were in their entirety, yes.
That's correct. I think...
So what you're saying is you didn't make it first the first guidepost, so they didn't even address what the plans are?
That's correct. Just a determination under 4.4.10 that their two-story garage, as a general matter, was improper. It sort of ended there. And it was,
I think that's, if you get a reversal here, I'm not saying you are, but if you did, I think a requirement would have to go through that architectural process because it was never fully vetted.
Right.
After conferring with municipal council.
Say that again, I couldn't hear you.
They did not submit the plan since they never reviewed it. If we say that it is appropriate for them to have a two-story garage based on the safety or the other elements of the code that he addressed, I think that the architectural elements have to be remanded back specifically for the approval of the architectural elements, since you never got there originally.
I think that's right.
I had a couple of comments, if everybody else is done right now. Regarding section 4.4.10, it provides that a replacement garage may be 2 stories tall when the original garage was 2 stories, or if located in a block where 2-story, 1 and 1.5-story garages are dominant or occur on an adjoining property. It does not say a replacement garage shall be 2-story. It says a 2-story garage may be, and that tells me that HP has discretion and judgment to exercise there. In terms of the meaning of adjoining, I've got 2 dictionary sources that are consistent in saying that located next to one another, touching. And to me, there's no ambiguity in terms of what adjoining means. And I understand your point about, there's across a right-of-way, there's another property that adjoins the right-of-way, and the right-of-way adjoins your property, and I understand that. But to me, the intent is that the properties are touching. They're side to side or behind the other property. I believe that the intent of the guideline, as stated in 3.3 under garages, is that a replacement garage may be 2 stories in height when the original garage was 2 stories. And so when we think back in terms of, we're not thinking back to the latest remodel or the latest construction at the home. We're thinking back in terms of what was originally there. And I think we're on the same page in terms it was a detached garage, and the whole Crown Heights neighborhood, in the testimony in the HP meeting, there were only 2 homes, I think, according to the Sanborn Mops, that had detached garage. So 2-car or 2-story garages in that neighborhood were not the dominant factor. We're not disputing the fact that many homes, have built 2-story garages, either before the guidelines went in place or in violation of the guidelines. I'm not disputing that at all. But you're spending a lot of money and a lot of your resources and a lot of time to improve your home. And as I watched your testimony at HP, you talked about the front door and the fact that it was not particularly weather tight, and you didn't argue for a replacement there, a more contemporary replacement. So it's obvious to me that you understand the benefit of the guidelines in protecting your investment, your financial investment, and also maintaining, the historic integrity of these neighborhoods. And one of the things that concerns me is, the world has changed since 1931, and homeowners are free to update their homes inside and to make them livable by today's standards. But every time that we begin to erode or consider eroding the enforcement of the guidelines, to me, it potentially adversely affects you and your investment in that neighborhood, not only in terms of your financial investment, but in terms of the quality of life, because I live in a neighborhood that was built in the mid-'50s, and we, the only covenants and restrictions are really, pigs and chickens, and there is no historic, preservation. And the character of my neighborhood is changing because, there's nothing that prevents people from changing their windows and changing other things that make those ranch-style homes begin to look, in some cases, appreciably different than when they were originally constructed. So the fact that you live in a historic neighborhood, you accept the fact that the guidelines are in place, it's a double-edged sword. In some cases, it may make it harder for you to do some of the things you'd like to do to the exterior features of your home. But on the other hand, it's your protection so that, the quality of life that you enjoy there, the financial investment that you're making is protected. And I do appreciate what you're doing for your home. You're going to a lot of time and trouble and expense, but I'm not going to be able to support your request because it is clear to me that that house, would have had a detached 1-story garage, and in spite of the remodels that have occurred there over the years, that doesn't justify to me going back and building a 2-story. The other thing I noticed, too, is that was a long hearing and a wearing afternoon, I think, for everybody that was involved. And you were very collegial and understanding and cooperative. And then the garage was at the end, and I'm sure everybody was exhausted, but your demeanor changed a little bit. And one comment you made was that you needed some additional quarters or guest bedroom or guest quarters at your home. And so I'm just, and this is just an observation on my part, that part of the desire to have a 2-story garage is to satisfy this need. And what I would tell you is that if that is part of what you need or what you're looking for in a 2-story garage, I think, Katie and the others at the city and your architect, I'm sure can look at some options that might provide you the additional space you need in your home for your family or your friends and still not erode the guideline. Because I think what's happening is there have been a number of 2-story garages built out of compliance with the guideline or before the guideline was in place. And so the character of the neighborhood has already changed. And what we're attempting to do, or what I'm attempting to do, is to put the brakes on further, because if we approve you, then the next guy uses our approval of you or, overturning your denial as justification for, and pretty soon it becomes like wildfire and the whole neighborhood changes. So I want you to understand this is not personal. It's not about you, and I very much appreciate your commitment to the neighborhood and what you're wanting to do. But I'm not going to be able to support your request to overturn HP's denial.
Well, I appreciate your position. I think that one of the part and parcels of HP also is to kind of know when to say when. And there's a time to say when. And you witnessed my time to say when with front door. I'm not asking for any relief on any front, side, street-facing facades, and I'd love to replace every window in the house with brand-new wood, true divided light windows. I'm just not going to go there, because I certainly understand the spirit of HP. I would argue that there's already been a precedent set with 17th Street. Clearly, I believe that property is not touching. And I think that a survey or a walkthrough would demonstrate that.
I think what we're talking about, though, is the spirit of the guidelines, and that's part of, I mean, we can parse this thing, down to the nth degree.
Sure.
The spirit of the guideline is to maintain, as much as we possibly can, the original character of the neighborhood. The original character of the neighborhood, as best I know, Katie, and you correct me if I'm wrong, had two-story garages in that development. The rest of them were single-story garages. So two-story garages were not the dominant feature in that neighborhood. We all acknowledge that they've been built since, for whatever reason, either out of compliance or before the guidelines. But to me, that doesn't justify perpetuating, and I don't want to call it a wrong or an injustice. I just want to say, at some point we want to put the brakes on. We want to say, hey, the intent of the guidelines is to keep it as close to original. We understand some things were done before the guidelines were implemented or out of compliance with the guidelines, but that doesn't justify, to me, granting another variance, because if we overturn this denial of the CA, then it's like, it really, I think, will be like wildfire, and you're going to see, every family that wants more space or thinks, that they need a two-story garage is going to be lined up asking for them. And that's, again, I'm not trying to deny you something you need or want, but I don't see the justification for overturning the denial, and I don't think the original, Crown Heights neighborhood had two-story garages as a dominant feature.
Jim, you got a comment? I want to say one thing. In regards to the unique circumstances, we've done that in interest of safety when that was the only option left. And I don't know the circumstances here, that may be the only option, but the unique circumstances regarding the staircase, that was in two situations since my tenure on the board when there was no other exhaustible options for safety than that. But that, I don't know if there are other options available. I just kind of wanted to amplify that. And you have anything, Mike?
It sounds to me like there's a couple of things that just weren't considered by the commission. I mean, we can sit here and they can sit there forever and debate the definition of adjoining and abutting, but I'm still missing a couple of things I don't think I heard they considered.
I agree with everything that Jeff says. We do not want these guidelines eroded, and we want them protected and interpreted consistently. But the one thing that I agree with Mike on is that I think there was a failure to adequately discuss and address 4.4.3 and the safety issue. And there may be other alternatives, but it's not in this record. And so I don't know what our authority is, but I would assume we have the authority to reverse and remand this for further proceedings, considering 4.4.3 and the safety issues that were raised by the unique circumstances of the property. And I think everybody should be entitled to a fair hearing, and neither side address that.
And I think, Katie said that they didn't consider 4.4.3 because it was, you never got beyond the two-story issue, so there was no reason, am I correct?
Right.
To consider the other matters. The other thing, too, is you've owned the house since December of 2009, and you're a sophisticated man, and I can't imagine that if this hazard existed and was of a concern to you and your family, that you wouldn't have addressed it in the 3.5 years that you've been there.
Oh, we've known since we moved in that the house was almost unlivable.
But as a basis for overturning a CA denial, I don't know whether it's serious enough for us to, use it as a basis for the denial of the CA.
I don't think you ever waive unsafe. If it's unsafe, it's unsafe, and it needs to be addressed.
But if it's unsafe, then why in 3.5 years hasn't it been dealt with?
It's still not waivable. If the house is still unsafe, it's an issue that needs to be addressed in my mind.
I know, but isn't it as a justification? To me, doesn't make sense. If there's a hazard in my house, I don't, do nothing about it and then use it as a justification for.
Would it be a possibility for this body to continue consideration of this and ask for more documentation of of the safety issue and of how the proposal that was denied addresses that safety issue.
I think I got to ask municipal council, but is that, I don't know if that's appropriate, because you're really not, you're just increasing your record on appeal. You're not giving them their time to have a fair hearing.
I think under the appeal is supposed to be limited to the issues and the evidence that was presented and decided by the commission. And if they never did present any evidence or decide that, then I'm not sure that that issue would be.
If that's the standard, if it's just based upon the record that was made below, then I tend to agree.
Well, it's de novo, but it does say it's limited to the issues and evidence presented and to the decision by the commission. So
I would feel more comfortable if we gave them an opportunity to flush out with the commission the things that have been addressed here. I feel like, I echo Mr. Voorhees, I feel like that it's an incomplete record. I feel like the safety issue needs to be addressed more thoroughly.
Well, a 4.4.3 analysis is a legal issue that was never addressed.
Never addressed, yeah.
And I'm not saying anything about the merits of your case. You may go back and lose. I'm saying I'm not hearing that everything was fully vetted at the
And let me clarify on 4.4.3 specifically. What I said I said that in general the design was not really discussed because we kind of stopped at it's 2 stories and that's not allowed. So we didn't go into further discussion about the design elements and the materials and whether they were appropriate. 4.4.3 is about replication or approximation of an existing garage, which in our opinion and in the commission's review of it, it was never presented as this garage is intended to be a replication of the existing garage. So as I said, that guideline is one that we use to guide people when they had a 1-story garage and it was structurally unsound and they tore it down and now they're going to build one back that looks just like it, which is not what's being proposed here. What's being proposed here is a completely different structure and footprint and design. So that guideline wasn't really called into discussion.
Not replication. This is replacement. You would never allow me to replicate the existing garage because it's unsigned. It's not, certainly not within the spirit of HP. What I'm proposing to build is, in my opinion, architecturally consistent with HP guidelines.
I guess does it replicate the house, the original house?
That's the question.
1931, and I don't think that was addressed.
Yeah, I think that's the point, is that wasn't addressed.
It's not whether it replicates the 1980s garage. It's whether, granted, the 1980s garage was a 2-story garage, but the question is, does it replicate what the house was in 1931? And isn't that the goal we're trying to accomplish?
Yes, yeah. The commission is flexible on allowing replacement in kind of things that are not original to the house, although they do encourage a more appropriate replacement of things that are non-historic or inappropriate features. I can't make a call on what they would say if you came in and said, I want to rebuild my 1980s garage in kind. That would be for the commission to decide.
I think this board would feel comfortable making a judgment call on that one.
It would not be administratively approved, I can tell you that. The guidelines look at if we know what the historic garage looked like, then we want you to try to match that, an original historic garage.
Yeah.
We have a Sanborn map that shows at one time there was a 1-story detached garage on the western property line. But other than knowing that approximation of a footprint, we don't know what that looked like. So we can't tell them you have to make it look like that because we don't know what it was.
Sure.
We also look at, is it compatible with the primary historic structure, that if that house is wood, your garage probably was wood. If that house is brick, your garage may have been brick. And then we look at what's the likelihood that you would have had a high-style garage with lots of architectural features and ornamentation matching a house, which is more common at some of the historic properties that are much larger, were built by wealthy residents. Or would you have had a garage that was a much more modest structure, a little wood, 1-car, Model T kind of garage, which is common at some of the smaller properties. So all of those design issues are taken into consideration when we look at a proposal to build a new garage. But because the commission said we aren't going to allow a 2-story garage and the applicant wanted to move forward with a denial so that they could move on and appeal the denial, we didn't continue the rest of the discussion about whether or not the design elements were appropriate.
And I hope you understand, I'm not saying this homeowner will prevail if this goes back to the HPC. I just tend to agree with Mike that there were certain things that weren't addressed here that should have been reviewed, in my mind.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, if nobody has anything else to add.
No, I'm even willing to have a sit-down with you and the other planners with my architect in place, which we never got to do, unfortunately, and that's to look at my plan, which is an exact replica of the 1931 house in miniature form in terms of the Tudor style. It matches the Tudor decorative wood on the front of the home. The bricks are consistent with the original bricks. In every way, shape, or form, it's a miniature version and not high style, as I understand HP terminology, averaging up with new mega mansion, McMansion garages at all, but we never got to have that discussion.
We always encourage those kind of discussions.
Yeah, and I would have thought, since we did submit the plans prior, in full plans, along with the architectural guidelines as to what all the steps were in construction, we never had that discussion. So,
And staff as always welcomes applicants to come in prior to submitting and looking with the applicant or with their architect at plans, but there also has to be time to do that, and usually it's at their initiation saying, we'd like to come in and discuss this with you.
Well, Ms. Weatherman,
but we'd be happy to do that, to sit down and...
Ms. Weatherman, the architect, did come in and visit with Katie, and there was some feedback that perhaps there might be an issue with two-story garage, which prompted me to go take pictures of the other 28 and submit those. And Katie, Alyssa wrote a letter to that effect, the architect. But as far as a discussion over plans of the garage, that didn't take place.
Yeah.
I want to point out to the other board members, too, in the video, at the end of the hearing, when the applicant was given the opportunity to talk about options for the garage, at that point they declined and chose, to accept, the judgment of the commission, and when the CA was denied, then to appeal. So I don't, I understand and I appreciate the desire to fully vet the issue and for everybody to be heard fairly and openly. But I think, this is one reason that, that conversation wasn't pursued, is because the two-story issue was what they dealt with. That's where, the commission said, we can't approve that. They voted, they denied the CA, and at that point, when you all were offered the opportunity to, consider other options, your decision, and it was your decision to simply
On my
accept that.
comment there, I didn't have counsel at that point. I wasn't prepared with any other alternative plans. We hadn't prepared any optional plans other than the ones that we had prepared. So, and I certainly wasn't expert on procedures.
And I understand that. But you could have asked for a continuance and asked for the opportunity to prepare, or just say you were unprepared. I think the commission goes out of their way to fully hear and to hear with understanding and, compassion and understanding these issues, these difficult issues sometimes that come before them. If the other board members want to remand it back, and you want to come prepared to talk about those options, and Katie sees it as a viable option, then I will support that. But
I think the commission does an outstanding job, and I think, fortunately now for the homeowner, he is represented by counsel, and I think that will help assist the process.
But I still think a one-story garage is what should occur at your property. But I have no problem if you want to go back to, and I mean, you can talk to them about, something that replicates the design of the house that's two-story, and let them be the judges on that.
I think we may very well get this back, but my motion is that we send it back to HP.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Kate.
Both sides did a great job in presenting that. Thank you.
I agree. There being no other business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned. Thank you.